Hello. In the Crown of Aragon, 639 years ago, it was February 28th, 1387. My name is Jonathan Seyfried. I'm a PhD candidate in history at the University of New Mexico, and this is the Historian's Notebook, a podcast about how history gets made. Season 1 is titled Multcara Companiona. We're looking at a document from each day of the first year of the reign of King Joan I of Aragon and Queen Violant de Bar. Let's begin today's document. I am really excited to talk about today's document because this document is one that I have been working on, not alone, but with a group of people at the University of New Mexico for about a month now. So I'm recording this on February 27th, and we first started working on this document on January 29th. So there is a group of medieval graduate students who are guided by one of the professors in the history department at the University of New Mexico. That professor is Dr. Timothy Graham, and he runs an informal Latin group where all the members of the group meet up once a week on Zoom, and we work on some kind of Latin transcription and translation. Each member of the group has the chance to choose material that the whole group works on, and we take turns. So one person will choose one particular document, we'll work on transcribing and then translating that document together with the ample help of Dr. Graham. And then we'll finish with that one, and then the next person in the group gets to choose a document. So I have taken advantage of this amazing resource, and it's all because of Dr. Graham being super generous with his time and his love of helping students to figure out medieval Latin that I had the chance to, for my turn, have a document that would appear in the podcast. So all the way back in, it must have been November, I identified a document that I would have felt really would be helpful for practicing the Latin that appears in the archive of the Crown of Aragon from documents related to Joan and Violant. And the way I made this choice was that I was working from an article that was published in 2015, written by the prolific Maria Teresa Ferrer y Mayol, along with a co-author, Carles Vela Aulesa. And this article focused on one particular person who had a pretty decisive role in the development of the reign of Joan and Violant. That person is an interesting, fascinating figure who goes by the name of Lucchino Scarampi. You might be thinking to yourself, that sounds like an Italian name, and it is. Lucchino Scarampi came from Asti, which is in the north of Italy, and in his early years, he and his brother started a merchant business in Genoa. But then pretty quickly, he went from Genoa to the Crown of Aragon, and he kind of specialized in, I think, doing deals that would go across this tension between the two realms. So Genoa and the Crown of Aragon were absolutely competitors in the Mediterranean trade zone. And oftentimes the governments of the Crown of Aragon or Genoa would do things like banning the other from doing any kind of business in territory that they controlled. And so Scarampi and his brother started to specialize in helping to move products across that boundary. And at one point, Lucchino Scarampi moves from being just kind of a merchant and money maker and deal maker to becoming something of a diplomat. During the last decade of the reign of Pere the Ceremonious, Joan's father, Lucchino Scarampi was engaged by King Pere to carry out negotiations on behalf of the Crown of Aragon for a peace treaty between the Crown of Aragon and Genoa. So it's a really interesting role that Lucchino Scarampi has in that moment because he is from Genoa in a way. I mean, Asti is pretty close, and so this is like within the region controlled by Genoa very closely. So he's from Genoa, but there he is representing the Crown of Aragon. So he had been in the Crown of Aragon for at least 15 years at that point and had risen up through the ranks, had made contacts, and become well acquainted with a lot of the leadership in the Crown of Aragon and with King Pere himself. There's documentation that connects Scarampi to obtaining some products for the king and the queen, and so Scarampi was a fixture in the royal orbit in the last 10 years of Pere the Ceremonious's reign. And so he is the leader of this peace negotiation effort on the part of the Crown of Aragon in its relations with Genoa. So then, when Pere the Ceremonious dies, Scarampi is well established as an effective diplomat. And so Joan and Violant decide to use him for quite a different purpose. They send him to Avignon in order to carry out negotiations for the marriage of their daughter to, and I think they have the person in mind at this time that she actually ended up marrying, which is Louis of Anjou, who is at this point connected into the royal family of Naples, although there's a lot of flux around who rules Naples and who is at this moment in line to inherit rule of the Kingdom of Naples. So it looks like Louis of Anjou is the frontrunner there. Gosh, he might have already actually had it at this time. But in any event, he's the number one target for the marriage of their daughter, Joan and Violant's daughter. And just as a side note, Sibylla had had a daughter with Pere, and Sibylla had been trying to get her daughter to marry Louis of Anjou, but couldn't get that settled, couldn't get the deal made before Pere died. And so now we just have like another example of the transfer of Queen Sibylla's whole kind of queenship over to Violant, because now it's Violant's daughter who's going to be entering into that marriage negotiation. So Lucchino Scarampi, in these documents that we're looking at today, is being outfitted with letters that authorize him to convey information to the Pope. And then in the second document on folio 95R, we have someone else being addressed for receiving Lucchino Scarampi, and then we've got a third letter which appears third on folio 95R, and continues on to folio 95V to yet another addressee who will be receiving Lucchino Scarampi in this matter of trying to make a deal for the marriage of Joan and Violant's oldest daughter to Louis of Anjou. This, in the end, is successful, but it's not immediately successful. I'm really starting to understand these marriage negotiations as very complex endeavors where it's even more difficult than a peace treaty, because in a peace treaty you're just trying to say we're going to stop fighting each other. And yes, you can tack on a bunch of conditions and it can get into a quagmire where the peace treaty never happens because there's all these conditions tacked on. But the marriage negotiation is, I think, a lot more flexible in that there's this idea that there's going to be some kind of transfer of money, property, authority, lineage. There's all kinds of little territories that can be added in or subtracted into who's going to get what at the end of this marriage. So, I mean, at the end of the marriage negotiation, I mean, also at the end of the marriage itself, like, they're thinking about what happens if somebody dies and who's going to inherit. So these are very intense negotiations, because you're not only talking about two people getting together and having a deal about getting them together, but you're also thinking about what could happen down the line. Because when you've got a marriage in a royal family, you are, in a sense, opening the door to future contestations for the right to rule. Everybody's very realistic. They know that disease or accident can lead to the untimely death of people who are in line for inheriting the throne, and that then you can wind up in a situation where there's two people who have kind of an equal claim and they each rally their forces, and it can actually become a pretty terrible civil war. And this actually does happen in the 15th century for the Crown of Aragon. And it's one of the reasons that Castile becomes quite dominant in the 15th century. All right. Wow, that really spun out. But it's also important to understand that these are very, very important and consequential negotiations, and that when we talk about Lucchino Scarampi being the lead diplomat for a peace deal between the Crown of Aragon and Genoa, and then we talk about how a couple years later he is in charge of doing marriage negotiations, we really should not be seeing that as a demotion. This is, in fact, very likely a promotion, that Lucchino Scarampi, in being trusted with leadership in this effort, is being given even more trust and authority by Joan and Violant. Now, I'm not going to say that I'm going to 100% with certainty make that claim, but that's what it starts to look like to me as I do more reading about medieval marriages in general, and as I keep in mind what happens next with Scarampi. So let's flash forward a little bit. Scarampi continues to do more and more deal making and merchant adventuring in terms of financing different merchant expeditions. His wealth grows quite a lot, and he is plugged into a pipeline of money from Genoa. So Lucchino Scarampi, during the reign of Joan and Violant, finds himself in a position where he is able to supply Joan and Violant with cash. And in exchange, Joan and Violant increasingly give him future rights over taxes and tax collections for different territories around the realm. So basically, what they say to him is, we're short on cash. Hey, Scarampi, will you give us a cash infusion? And in exchange, we're going to grant you the right to collect the taxes for such and such territory around the realm. Or they might just flat out take out a loan from Scarampi. This compounds year after year. I mean, there's also interest on the loans that compounds. And so by the time we get to the end of Joan's lifetime, which is then the end of the reign of Joan and Violant as king and queen of the Crown of Aragon, Lucchino Scarampi is making a ton of money off of Joan and Violant. He has lent them an inordinate sum of money that then raises serious alarm bells for many people in the realm. In the spring of 1396, Lucchino Scarampi left the Crown of Aragon and journeyed into the Pyrenees region and western France. During that time, there was a rumor that Scarampi was working to hire mercenary armies to invade the Crown of Aragon. Why would he do that? That is a very, very important and mysterious question. As Scarampi is rumored to have been doing these things, people in the Crown of Aragon in the leadership circles are like, it's just a rumor, it's not true. Don't believe that. Scarampi, he's like buddy-buddy with Joan and Violant. He's not going to like raise a bunch of mercenaries in order to invade. But then it was found out that it was not a baseless rumor, that it was in fact true. And right as that news arrives to the Crown of Aragon in May of 1396, that is when Joan dies. And the story that has been generally accepted is that Joan went out hunting, one of his favorite pastimes, and he died through some kind of accident on that hunting trip. It's really not clear exactly what happened. It's very possible that he had some kind of seizure or like a stroke or something like that. And no one's saying he fell off his horse. That's not the story, but there's some kind of condition, some kind of affliction that hits him in May of 1396 on a hunting trip, and he dies. He dies without last rites, which immediately sends you to purgatory. And well, maybe we've referred to that a little bit in some earlier episodes, and there's a lot that goes along with that, but we don't have time to get into that too deeply right now. We will later in future episodes, the implications of Joan ending up in purgatory. Now, at that moment, the next in line to the throne is Joan's brother Martí, because Joan and Violant at that time do not have any surviving male children. Martí is in Sicily, so Maria de Luna, Martí's wife, she assumes leadership as queen in a move that's eerily parallel to what we've been looking at with Violant showing up to Barcelona ahead of Joan. Maria de Luna in May of 1396 shows up to Barcelona, takes control extremely rapidly, like, oh gosh, I don't want to get, all right, I'm getting conspiratorial, like she knew it was coming. And the rapidity, the fastness with which all of Joanne's leadership figures are rounded up and arrested is quite impressive. And immediately, like within 10 days of Joanne's death, a criminal proceeding is opened up by the new queen, Maria de Luna. And an investigation and interrogation is set down on paper, and we still have that. It's a processo. We still have that written process. And guess who everybody points the finger at as the reason for all of the different financial problems and all of the misdeeds and all of the scandal? It is Lucchino Scarampi. He comes out as the number one villain, like it was all his criminal mastermind that kept sinking the royal family into more and more debt, and that he was the one to blame for everything that was going wrong in the realm. So, Lucchino Scarampi is like criminal number one in that moment in May of 1396. We don't know what happens with Lucchino Scarampi in the subsequent 12 months, but what's quite amazing to see is that by the time we get to the summer of 1397, just about a year later, Martí is in Barcelona. Martí has established his reign. Things are calm and stable. And Lucchino Scarampi is again the recipient of tax collection privileges by King Martí. So Lucchino Scarampi somehow wiggles out of being criminal mastermind villain number one in May of 1396 to the point where he's just right back doing what he's been doing for the last 25 to 30 years, which is being a wheeler, a dealer, and a fixer, and a source of cash infusion for the royal family of the Crown of Aragon. Lucchino Scarampi is quite fascinating. And here we've got a snapshot of his connection to Joanne and Violant. I just wish that we had something really juicy in these letters that the Latin group helped me to transcribe and translate. I can say that they're very formulaic and they don't really reveal a ton of secrets at all. But there is something interesting about the second and third letter in this little series. And I alluded to it before at the beginning when I was talking about how, all right, we got one letter to the Pope authorizing Lucchino Scarampi to inform the Pope about the business of this marriage negotiation. And then I didn't mention any names for the addressee of the second and third letters. And that is because there is no specific addressee. There's a little note at the bottom of the second letter that reads, Fuit expedita sine suprascriptionem. And then in the bottom of the third letter, Fuit expedita obsque suprascriptionem. This means it was sent without a superscription. It was sent without a line to indicate an addressee. So what's being done here, my theory, is that these are blanket letters, that Lucchino Scarampi is being given letters that could be presented to several different people and make it look like they were being individually addressed to that person. Who would be these groups of people? I think that we're talking about cardinals or other religious leaders, ecclesiastical office holders of high office. And I have that guess because of the way that these two letters are addressed. Reverende Pater. They're addressed towards somebody who has some kind of ecclesiastical position. The two letters are slightly different, number 2 and number 3. And actually, Latin group has been working on this for a month, but we haven't gotten to the end of our work on these 3 letters. And next week is when we're going to finish our translation of letter number 3, and we're going to discuss then in detail the subtle differences between letters 1, 2, and 3 in this little series. And at that point, I'm going to come back to the web page of this document and add in some additional information. But right now, from my understanding is not good enough to identify why 2 different letters were necessary for the generic group addressees. Like, why would you need to have one set of, say they're cardinals, why would you need to have one set of cardinals get letter number 2 and another set of cardinals get letter number 3? Why is that necessary? Then at the end of letter number 3, it seems like there's mention in another line right below the Fuit Expedita line that there were additional letters sent out that were kind of like the same kind of thing. Well, is it because you're giving them to different people? Or why do you have to have 2 different versions? These are questions that Dr. Graham is going to help me understand, but we didn't quite finish these in time for today's episode, and that's just how it goes. So there's going to be another Scarampi set of letters, or maybe just one letter, later on in the year. I'm thinking something around August, so stay tuned for that. But I think we might see Lucchino Scarampi popping up again even before that, maybe in a Catalan language letter. We'll see what happens. So I just want to extend my heartfelt thanks to everybody at the University of New Mexico Latin group, and a thank you to Dr. Graham for all the help that he is currently providing me with understanding the subtleties in the Latin in these documents. And I want to thank you for listening to this kind of extended episode of The Historian's Notebook, Season 1, Molt Cara Compagnona. And if you are leaving with more questions than you arrived with about medieval marriages or this Genoese loan shark named Lucchino Scarampi, well, then I've done my job. Sparked your curiosity, I hope. Remember, the motto of The Historian's Notebook is dissatisfaction guaranteed. Visit the website to see an image of today's documents and additional show notes. And listen again tomorrow to hear about the next day in the first year of the reign of King Joan I of Aragon and Queen Violant de Bar. In the meantime, take care.